Hello watch enthusiasts. Now today I'd like to talk about wristwatches which have caught my attention recently. Now I made one of these videos in September, but since then a lot of watches have come out which have really caught my attention and interested me, equally from smaller and larger brands. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is this a website which I often look at because it's a very interesting one called Timeline Watch. And this has been made by a major watch collector by the name of Dan Henry. And this encompasses a great deal of watches which he owns over a timeline which is very elegantly presented. Now this website really does encompass a great deal of different watches from many different manufacturers, Rolex, Omega, Longines to state a few. But it really does show beautiful attention to detail and knowledge of these vintage watches, which is quite rare these days. However, it's not Timeline Watch which I'd like to talk about today. It's Dan Henry, which is his sales website for wristwatches which are made in China but commissioned by him. And these watches, in my opinion, show real attention to detail and really beautiful design. Now, it's very clearly stated that these watches are actually made in China by specific factories which have been commissioned to make these watches. But they are made to a very, very high standard, and one can clearly see the attention to detail on these watches is superb. And what interests me most about these watches is they are based on designs and hints from designs which one sees in his collection. So, for example, the 1970, which is his supercompressor diver on the right-hand side there, is a watch which resembles a vintage supercompressor very, very closely, which is something which I really appreciate when a lot of vintage-styled watches don't really have an aim or a goal to look like their predecessors. Whereas here there really has been care to make them look as authentic as possible. Now he currently produces 4 models. The first, the 1947, is a very elegant dress watch with a design which is very typical of that era, with brushed segments on the dial and segmented segments, making this watch very, very different to other dress watches on the market. Now it is quartz, which some people will not appreciate, but in my opinion the design of the watch more than makes up for that, and equally the pricing of these watches is very, very reasonable, around the £200 mark. In my opinion, that sub-second dial is also a beautifully well chosen idea, because it really does declutter the dial and make the whole dial more legible, more visible, and easier to appreciate in all its beauty. Now the next watch in the lineup is the 1963, and this is a stainless steel pilot's chronograph. Now it uses a Miyota Japanese chronograph movement, which is quartz. So again, it's not a mechanical chronograph, but for the price of around £200, this really is very impressive. So it has a bidirectional GMT bezel, which is again a very, very nice touch and a hint to what this watch is trying to be, a pilot's chronograph. Equally, it has a highly loomed dial, and highly legible dial with those hands. And again, I think the brushing on the bezel is a very, very nice choice and makes this watch look very much of its era. Now, when I first saw this watch, I thought, wow, that looks a lot like a Breguet Type 20. But actually, looking at it, it looks more like one of the vintage Breitlings from the 60s, and their chronograph watches, which were in a different line to the Navitimer. So it's not comparable to that, but it is comparable to some of the other black dial Breitling chronographs, which is again a nice touch. While not being an homage watch, it captures the spirit of watches of this era. I also think the contrast between brushing and polishing on the sides of the case really lends to a very versatile watch which fits in a number of contexts. So for example, as a pilot's watch, as a sports watch, or as in fact a sort of a pseudo dress watch, due to the elegance of this case. I do feel though that the pièce de résistance of this watch is that case back. I love nicely designed case backs. This is just something in my opinion, but for me, I'd rather see a really cleverly decorated case back than the movement itself, if the movement isn't decorated. So for example, in this case where it's a quartz movement, I see it as being a really good opportunity to make a really elegant case back, and here they definitely have taken advantage of that by putting an SR71 Blackbird on the back of the case, which really does lend to that aviation aesthetic and that historic nature of this design. Another interesting watch in their lineup is the 1968. Now this fits very clearly between a dress watch and a sports watch, because this is again a quartz chronograph, but it's a very discreet chronograph in that it's like one of those old Omega chronostops, where they actually looked more like a dress watch than a chronograph, but did have that extra functionality. And here, with that very minimalistic dial, but with that 1 sub-second, or rather 1 sub-dial, this watch has actually been made extremely functionally versatile, and given a lot of helpful features, hence being able to time things with this watch. The choice of 2 dial colours also lends to a watch which is more versatile in terms of a dress context, so you can match it best with what would suit you better. However, the final watch in the collection is, in my opinion, the most interesting. This is the 1970, and this is a super compressor dive watch with an automatic Seiko NH35. So that's a manually wound and hacking Seiko automatic movement, which I think is a really nice choice for this watch because it offers a very tough movement, but equally one that's serviced very easily, which does help when a watch is sitting at around this price point of £200 to £300. Now this watch comes in 2 versions, one with an orange chapter ring and one with a grey chapter ring in second hand. And in my opinion, this does give 2 very distinct looks to the watch. One which is a more formal wristwatch, and the other which is a more bright sports watch. Now both are water resistant to 200 metres and are super compressor cases with the crowns that press in under pressure, which is a really nice touch when a lot of watches which are super compressors, or at least designed that way these days, simply have opted for screw-down crowns, which really defeats the object of the exercise, in my opinion. Now the case is 44mm from side to side, which is rather large, but it does have rather short lug structures, so it should be fairly comfortable. And it has a lug width of 24mm, which are pretty much the widest you can get normal straps. Obviously, there are 26mm straps, but only on large Panerais and watches of that type. But in my opinion, this watch offers a very interesting look and interesting history, considering the design of this watch really is something from the 1970s. Now, the watch comes on a Tropic rubber strap, which I think was a very good choice for this watch, seeing as it's very much the type of strap that would have been worn on this type of watch back in the day. Now, with the back of this watch, there also has been a very great effort made, because I love the design of this, what they call a scaftopus, which is, of course, a diving helmet with an octopus body, octopus legs, which I think is a really elegant look and makes me think of a very sort of Bond villain sort of style to this watch, which appeals to me greatly. Now, I have actually ordered one of these watches, because I just think they offer something which I haven't seen elsewhere. So I should be receiving that fairly soon. I'll give the review in the next few weeks, I should think. But I really do rather like the aesthetic, and I appreciate the fact that these have been designed by a collector. Another watch which has caught my attention recently, and is a watch which has been interesting me for a while now, as it was pre-announced and so on, is the Squale 1621, the 60 Atmos. And this is a watch which is dubbed the Squale-matic. And this is a larger 1521, which is of course a watch which we've come to love over the years, with a very individual dive style and case design. And this really refines the design. It does also increase the size from 40mm to 44, which for some is a problem, but I personally think it's a nice change. Now, it comes in 3 variants: a black with polished case, a black with a bead-blasted case, and a bright blue, which I think is the most beautiful in my opinion. Now, the refinements over the normal 1521 are that, of course, the case is larger, and equally it incorporates those different style indices around the dial, which are, in my opinion, probably less legible underwater, but nonetheless more attractive. It also has changed for a paddle style second hand for a lollipop style. Now, the bezel has also been replaced for a style of Bakelite insert, which gives a sort of a clear and gleaming sort of look, with metal inset markers underneath. Lume has also been added at 12 and 6, making for a very attractive look in the dark. Now, the most neutrally designed version of this watch is the normal black version, which has a very simple black design, with the only colour being the orange minute hand, being a very legible touch to the dial. If you like that black style, but you want something a little bit more, then the orange and black bead-blasted version is probably the one for you. Now, this one has a very different design, so it still features the black dial, but it's slightly sunbursted, and equally has orange lume on everything apart from the minute and hour hands, making for a very attractive look, and a very different one from the normal black, and also differentiates this from the 1521 line. One very nice touch on this watch is the orange lume on the second hand, which means it's clearly visible when a lot of second hands with that skeleton style, with that very narrow metal frame, can disappear into the dial at times on other watches. Now, apart from being 44mm, the case design hasn't changed, so it has very much the same design as you would see on a 1521, so if you like that, you will like this in terms of the design. However, the water resistance has of course been boosted 100 metres to 60 atmospheres, so 600 metres. My favourite, however, is definitely the blue and white version. I think this version captures everything we loved about that blue 1521 and improves it. So it still has the polished case, as opposed to the bead-blasted one, and it has a sunburst blue dial, which is lighter than the blue we've seen on the 1521. It also has that Bakelite bezel split into two colours, the blue and the white, which is again a beautiful touch. The lume is all the same colour on this watch as well, which personally I think does complement the blue better than, say, the orange would have. Again, that orange minute hand is a nice touch and a nice flash of colour on the dial. I think what I like the most about this watch, though, is the fact that the blue reminds me of that sort of Italian blue that one sees, which I think reminds one of the origins of this watch as being an Italian dive watch, and separates it really from the other more subdued wristwatches from other companies. Now, at £1,000, these watches are quite expensive, considering their movement, which is an ETA 2824. That said, though, you are getting very, very high water resistance, and really very high quality in terms of the bezel and the materials. So I think it's perfectly justified and really would make a wonderful watch for any dive collection. Finally, a few new watches from Sinn have really impressed me and have taken a really new look to the U1 dive watch. Now, Sinn has come out with a U1 which is fully PVD coated, but again it's a type of carbon hardening over the surface of the tegmented steel. So you get this very, very hard PVD coating, which I think is very practical considering the inherent nature of PVD rubbing off on a lot of watches. Now, equally, what has interested me the most and separates these watches from other U1s with PVD is that lume. Now, here Sinn have gone for this bone-coloured style of lume, which in my opinion gives the whole watch a very old-fashioned look. And equally, it's loomed all around the bezel, whereas previously U1s have had lume only on the 12 o'clock point. Equally, the addition of that second hand, which doesn't quite have the same lume as the rest of the dial, adds a little bit of contrast and makes the whole watch a little bit more exciting. Now again, the design of this watch is very Bauhaus and very simple, but still retains an elegance with this monochromatic look, which it didn't have originally, so I think this look really does suit the wristwatch. For me, this changes a watch which was originally a very, very professional 1,000-metre diver into something which is perhaps more versatile due to its more simple colouring, which is again something which I appreciate. The next interesting watch from Sinn is the 212 KSK, and that's from a military unit that this watch was issued to in a 70-piece run, which was called the K212. And this version is the civilian version, which is now coming out, and it has this 1,000-metre water resistance, so it has the similar technology that one sees in a U1, but in a larger size at 47mm. Now, in my opinion, this watch turns the U1 from a really serious diving watch into something more versatile. So here you have a watch which is extremely water resistant, but also has a compass bezel, which can be used, which again makes for a very practical watch in the field, rather than something which is specific to diving. Due to the sheer size of this watch, the crown has been moved to roughly the 10 o'clock position, which of course moves it out of the way and stops it from digging into the wrist, which is a very pleasant thing to have changed, seeing as the U1, some people did have issues with that, hence there was a moved crown version. This watch does also have a GMT function, so it has a GMT hand moving around the dial, very similar, in my opinion, to a pilot's airman, so a Glycine airman, due to that design. Equally, it has very simple hands, but ones which can easily be differentiated due to their different lume. Now again, the case is submarine steel, so it's already very hard, and the bezel is then tegmented and PVD coated with that carbon PVD, which is particularly hard and resistant. And then, of course, you have the KSK symbol in the middle, showing the origins of this wristwatch. Sinn have also incorporated their AR dehumidifying technology in this watch to keep the inside of the watch dry, even if there is some humidity that gets in, which is again a very, very helpful feature. Now, the price for this watch is around £3,000, £2,500 to £3,000, depending on whether you go for the rubber strap or the bracelet. But considering this is real military hardware, that is rather good value. That said, this price does sit above other Sinn watches in their sports lines, but if you want something that very much incorporates everything you might need, this watch is probably the one to go for. It is also a limited watch to 300 pieces, which again is something interesting about this watch. Anyway, that was just a list of watches which have interested me recently. So thank you very much for watching. Do please like, share and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more on my channel. So thank you very much for watching. This is Arm on the Watch Guy, over and out.